May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be always faithful and acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. So in last week's sermon, I talked about the first part of Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 12, where he says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. And this week, at the end of that chapter, we hear Paul list out in the number of ways that you and I individually and collectively are to live our lives so that we can fulfill this desire and call of Paul that you and I be holy and acceptable to God. The particular piece of Paul's list that I would like you to reflect on with me is this call to live in harmony with one another. Now, my music education is limited, but I can get out that harmony is about a set of notes in consonant with one another, that their relationship one to the other is such that it is pleasing and appealing. Each note continues to be itself a note, but it is the relationship between the notes that produce the pleasing sound. When there is disharmony, there is a dissonance between the notes, that they are struggling one with the other. And as a metaphor for us in our lives, our work, our life's goal is to work through that dissonance to bring about harmony, working together one with another. Now, in my younger days, I was much more a student of government. And I loved to read the paper. I mean, my idea of part of a good Sunday morning ritual was the Washington Post spread around me, going through every page of it. But this summer, it has been particularly hard for me to read the news. There is a level that this has been a summer of dissonance. A summer where harmony has not been found often. And in one sense, I can think of at least three different ways that this dissonance has been sounding quite loud. First is just the general political dialogue between elected leaders and those of us who engage in conversation about what our country ought to be doing. It has moved beyond simply disagreements about the content of what ought to be done. But there is a dissonance in the way we talk to each other, in the way that we demonize the other person. Even more specifically, the events in Ferguson have shown the dissonance that exists every day, actually, in our community. That even if we set aside the tragic death of a teen boy, not knowing the fact, if we set it aside, the response that the community has given voice to, that this is part of a pattern of everyday life if you're an African American teenager. We who are white, we need to hear that response. We need to hear what life is like, what it is in the relationship to be a person of color and a minority in the broader culture. But this summer of dissonance also has shown up to be not only in how we relate to one another as people, but even the dissonance between humanity and creation. A month ago, nearly 500,000 residents of the city of Toledo, Ohio, could not drink the water. Not in some far and distant country, but here in the continental United States, within a day's drive. If you were to turn on the faucet, the water would look the color of my stole and would be toxic to drink. This happened as a result of a gigantic, toxic algae bloom. The cause of it was our use of fertilizers and pesticides and chemicals on our lawns and in our farms that by runoff gets brought into the watershed and from the watershed into one of the Great Lakes. Combined with warmer temperature, creates a cocktail that one cannot drink. Now, when we speak of these problems of political discourse and the issue of race and the environment and sustainability, it can seem as if these problems are so large that our individual response is, what can I do? How do I just simply push it aside, I'll live my life, and not address it? But I want to offer to you that one person can make a difference. How many of you have heard of the Ice Bucket Challenge? Have you heard the story of how it started? With a 29-year-old man, Peter Frates, who is suffering from ALS himself. The whole challenge that has taken this country by storm began with one young man fighting to make an issue more known so that in knowing people might contribute to research and care, and that therefore eventually there will be a day when this disease will not take people's lives. Between July 29th and August 27th, $94.3 million have been donated to the ALS Association. In the same period a year ago, $2.7 million was collected. So for the quick math, that means that as a result of the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge, they have raised 35 times as much money this year in a one-month period than they did a year ago. Mahatma Gandhi is famously quoted as saying, "Be the change that you want to see." You and I need to trust that if we change our own lives, the way that we live and relate to people at home, at work, in our communities, the way we change what we do with our investments and our political activities, then at the very least the world will change incrementally, if not exponentially, 35 times. So where do we start? Where do we start in bringing this change? And as long as we're reading with Paul, we can stay with Paul. For right after suggesting that we need to live in harmony with one another, Paul reminds us, persevere in prayer. The first place to start is in prayer with God. And that place where you see disharmony in your life, whether it's in your house or in your place of work or your place of church or your place of community, go to God in prayer. Offer it up, say, God, I don't like the sound of this. What is my part in moving from dissonance to harmony? And I can assure you that if in faithfulness you take your issues to God, God will respond. You may not like it, but God will respond. God will show you where the first step is. And the next place to go after going to God in prayer is to go to other people. Paul commends us, do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Do not claim to be wiser than you are. If we are going to change the culture of conversation about politics and finding solutions for our country and community's problems, then we have to engage in conversation with those who think differently than we do. Find a Democrat, find a Republican, find a liberal, find a Tea Party member, find someone who thinks differently than you, but who you trust. And don't talk to them or at them, but listen to them. Ask them about their life. Ask them about their experiences. Ask them about what their fears are, their hopes are, and why they see things the way they do. Find someone who is African American or Hispanic or Asian and ask them about their life. Ask them about their experiences. Hear what they have to say. And figure out where it is that you can bring about a change, bring about a greater part of harmony. When I was in France a couple years ago, I speak no French at all. And so I had to pay attention closely to what was going on so I could figure out how to communicate. And one of the things that I quickly observed is that no matter where I went, no matter where people went, every conversation began bonjour or bonsoir. That until you acknowledged the other person and greeted them, you could not move on for transaction of some sort of business. Even before I could ask them, parlez-vous anglais? I had to say good morning. I had to say good evening. I had to acknowledge that they were another person standing here in relationship to me. You and I need to do that in our own lives here and now. We need to acknowledge those who live in our midst who are different than us in any way, shape, or form. Because it's only when we acknowledge others as people, as children of God, that you and I can create harmony. And when you and I create harmony, we can create happiness and joy and fulfillment. When you and I create harmony in this world, then in that day, you and I will be presenting ourselves as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable to the God who created us and loved us and died for us. Amen.